This is part 7, estrogen dominance. Like I said in the beginning of the video, much of this work is attributed to Ray Peat. Ray was the first person who brought up the idea of estrogen dominance. This was, I think, back in the late 60s. It says here in Wiki, the theory was proposed first by Dr. Raymond Peat. John R. Lee learned about progesterone and estrogen dominance when he attended a lecture by Dr. Raymond Peat, and he wrote about it in his book, 1996. It says in the book, Lee and Hopkins assert that estrogen dominance causes fatigue, depression, anxiety, low libido, weight gain, specifically in the midsection, water retention, headaches, mood swings, white spots on the fingernails, fibrocystic breasts. Lee's theories have been criticized for being inadequately supported through science, being primarily based on anecdotal evidence with no rigorous research to support them. This is the bias. Estrogen dominance can affect both men and women. Uterine Hamster article that he writes, and I believe it's in the 1960s or 1970s. And he talks about how even though the ovarians are not producing as much estrogen, the tissues can still be producing a lot of estrogen. And since the ovarians are also not producing progesterone anymore, then that actually leaves the organism in a very vulnerable state. And this is the core idea of what estrogen dominance really means. And so you can type it in Google, tissue-bound estrogen, and again, you will see that this is a well-known phenomenon. Tissue-bound estrogen is when estrogen molecules bind to proteins in target tissues such as the reproductive tract, the mammary gland, and the brain. All right, so you're seeing some of those patients that have Alzheimer's, and they're not saying that it's just because of fungi, but it's also because of estrogen going into places where it shouldn't be. Estrogen accumulating in the brain, breaking down those fatty acids, contributing to more of a fight or flight response than you are an aerobic metabolism or glucose oxidation. And so this is two articles that I wrote on my Substack. You go take a look at them. They injected estrogen into the lungs of rats, and what was produced were these lamellar bodies here. And you could also cause an injury. Like they say that prostaglandin E2, it occurs near injury. So you could literally cause an injury on mice and it will produce these lipid lamellar bodies. If you inject the mice with estrogen, it's just going to produce more of those lamellar bodies in a more abundant, more visible form. There was a scientist, I think his name is Matag. It might have occurred in the late 1990s. Well, this scientist and his fellow colleagues already showed that the Malassezia yeast are specifically using the lamellar bodies as their cellular infrastructure. And even in the Tinea Versicolor infections, they're using these lamellar bodies. So either way you put it, it just continues to generate that circle of estrogen, fatty acids, Malassezia yeast infections. Check out those two articles. These research papers came out in the 90s. This should have already been solved decades ago. All right, we are at the outro.